Welcome everyone. This is a Sigma stream for February 28th, 2025. I wanted to make sure I got something out in the month of February. I haven't done anything this month. I have plenty of excuses, plenty of reasons. Been very busy with real life, but I've got Degreestudies here. We're going to talk about some stuff. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm good. Like I mentioned, been very busy, been very sick. I think not I've not necessarily been very sick. I have been off and on sick for like 2 months, and members of some member of my family has been sick for every day of the last 2 months. And then I think they made I think the deep state or whatever they were trying to put out like a new virus. I'm pretty sure because like everyone I knew was getting sick, and they were like saying this is a little bit different than any sickness I've had before, and it came on strong, and everyone around me got it, and so I think they were trying to do like another coronavirus. Maybe it didn't work quite the
I
same.
have a theory about that if you want.
Yeah, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
So I think I'm going to go a little bit against Twitter and our people online, but like I think there's lots of things in life. Like I'll give you an example. Like my mom has always misplaced things, like misplaced
Hmm.
her phone, misplaced her wallet. But now that she's old, she thinks it has to do with mental decline. And I always try to tell her like you've sort of been absent-minded and had a bad short-term memory forever. Like uh you shouldn't attribute this to age. So like you can be less stressed.
Mm.
And as long as I've been alive, every winter I would say I know 40 or 50 people who are like, this isn't the normal flu. This is the worst I've ever felt. Like
Yeah.
that's just what people are like. But now you combine that with like the conspiratorial mindedness of the internet, and people go from being like, oh, it's a bad flu year to being like something's going on. But I think people's tendency to always like I notice, and I sort of feel this way too, that like people always say, unless it's really light, the latest time people are sick, people are always saying like, oh, this was really bad, it's different than normal. But it's like being sick just sucks, and I think it's an experience that's rare enough that you forget about it like between years, and then it sort of kicks
Yeah.
your ass again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, maybe there's like you have this like short term memory about what it actually felt like the last time you were sick, and so when it hits again, you weren't. Yeah, you didn't have an accurate memory of the past. Yeah, that could be, but I still think they were trying to unleash a new one, and it like wasn't powerful enough. It was bad, but not enough. Like, and so they were trying to get him. They're trying to get Trump in his new term. They're like, let's see how he does now
Yeah,
with
the
another
real proof
virus.
is that I didn't get sick, and since I'm well known to be Trump's strongest soldier, it just doesn't check out, as
Yeah,
the deep
yeah,
state op.
yeah. So other than that, I've been okay. Lots of people in my circle, people I know, are facing some crazy. Maybe this could be the first topic. People I know are facing uncertainty because they either I don't know a lot of people that work directly for the government, but I do know people who like the government is so big that lots of industries, even industries you wouldn't think are necessarily government related, like one of their big customers is the government. So uh, lots of people I know are sort of facing a period of uncertainty right now, and some people I know have already lost jobs and stuff, and it's directly related to Doge. Um, what are your thoughts on Doge so far? It's like seems like it's been about like 3 or 4 weeks they've really been running, and they've certainly done some stuff.
Oh man, I have so many thoughts on this, and I don't know if any of them will be popular. Let me start by saying, like, I have worked for a lot of like research and development firms working in the Middle East that got money from U.S. aid. I'm not doing that now, but as a result of that, I know a lot of people who work at aid, and I know people who work in different parts of the federal government. So, like, I've sort of had a front row seat to how it, or I've at least been able to hear from people inside how that's playing out, both at the agencies that, like, DOGE had its the Eye of Sauron on already, which is aid, and other places where they're sort of like waiting for the shoe to drop. Um, and it's funny. One just funny anecdote is the last place I worked was a development NGO that worked in the Middle East, and I kind of their staff tended to be like communist and or Arab, and I sort of, because of the Gaza stuff, I sort of like convinced everyone I worked with to either not vote or vote for Trump. Or like, I don't know if my effect was that dramatic, but by the time I left, which was in the fall, like a month before the election, everyone was like totally okay with the fact that I liked Trump. And some of them were even saying like, I'm going to stay home, or like, I like the transactional way Trump talks about foreign policy, like he's not a liar like the Democrats or something. So I feel like I'd done a lot of legwork to like bring them around. And now they're all texting me being like, you piece of shit, like we don't have grants anymore, like are you happy with your boy? And I'm sort of just like, yeah, like um but there is, I mean, I want to be circumspect in what I say here, because Steve Bannon just went on Tim Dillon's show, and
Uh-huh.
one of the things he said, he didn't say it in a pointed way. Like, Tim allowed him to speak at length about what he thought about Elon, and Bannon has criticized Elon, and I think there's a polarity between sort of uh, the populist right uh, and the tech right, and Bannon represents one pole and Elon another. And though Bannon's been critical, he was careful in this interview to say, uh, these tech right people, and especially Elon, helped us. Uh, Elon gave 50 million a month for the ground game. He did claim, I thought this was interesting because this is a question that I've asked myself. He did claim, the way he put it was, he thought they would have won without Elon, but that the election wouldn't have been able to be called on the first night, and it would have been much more complicated. I don't know if he's sort of pulling that out of his ass, or if that's based on numbers he's seen. But that's interesting, because whenever I talk about Elon and not loving certain aspects of the way Elon conducts himself, I do feel obliged to say, like, Elon's role in bringing money to Trump, and maybe more importantly, signaling to other tech people and rich people that it was okay to publicly and privately support Trump. I think those things were very important. Um, and so I feel gratitude to Elon for the way he broke for Trump and what he did during the campaign. That said, I think the tech right, broadly speaking, is uh, the part of the Trump coalition that I'm least comfortable with. Like, it seems to me like they're very deft at taking ideas about the economy that I associate with Reagan, and I associate with libertarianism and the old conservative coalition, and
Mm-hmm.
dressing them up as culture war so that MAGA people like them. Like, the question I ask myself is like, the spectacle that Elon is making is like, he tweets out like a program with a ridiculous name and is like, see, we're getting rid of this, like, red meat for chuds. There's no transgender clinics in Bangalore paid by taxpayers. But like, I wonder if to him, and I don't know, I'm not trying to imply anything. I'm asking a speculative question. Like, does it matter to him what these programs are, or does he just have sort of an older conservative view and like a market guy view that, like, we should reduce state capacity so that private firms can step into this space? And that's something that, even as I don't like the people who work in government, except for the friends I've mentioned before, and I don't like the programs, I think the way Elon talks about it is not framing the issue as the way I understand the issue. Like, for example, and I think I said this to you and Arturo, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but I feel like this is
No, go
something
for it.
I know a lot about. The way I understand U.S. aid, I mean, there is an element of it, of U.S. aid and NDI and IRI. There is like social programming, especially related to like democratization, that maybe a generation ago or like right after the world wars would have been more handled by intelligence agencies. But there's sort of this soft power stuff that's like build up a liberal media, build up LGBT activists, build up environmental stuff, that I think that drifted from intelligence operations to sitting somewhere between diplomacy and international development. Like the State Department does some of it through weird offices like the Conflict and Stabilization Office, CSO, and what's the other one? There's another weird one that does like uh, DRL, Democracy, Rights, and Labor. Like I've worked on contracts for those groups that's like training women on how to conduct local elections in Syria or whatever, or like training women on gender rights. And sometimes those things are from those offices at state, and sometimes they're from aid. And I did sort of think like my problem with all of them was always that, and this is true of a lot of agencies in the United States, like the agency programming always reflected a political point of view that maybe only about 20% of the American public agreed with in any given time, which is to say,
Hmm.
like, very, very progressive. Um, and that's weird because, of course, the populations in which you're conducting these programming is even less progressive than the United States. So, like that example I just gave is instructive, where it's like you're talking to random Syrians about like gender dynamics and political
Yeah,
institutions from a
it's like the
perspective.
meme or whatever. Was like, gay sex in Rwanda or whatever.
Yeah, and
Um,
so
I'll die for the right for Rwandans to have gay sex.
right, so like I sort of feel like it's totally correct that like this programming got way out in front of anything that taxpayers would approve of. But actually, I think like a hidden part of the story that should be emphasized more is how much this is a result of Republicans like laying down on the job, because Republican lawmakers in Congress approve these budgets and always had access to the names and nature of these programs. And like one of the things that annoys me about the way Elon frames it is he sort of acts like this was secret. Whereas like before any of this started, you or I could have gone to the USAID website and looked at the programming and like read abstracts and looked at the name. And more importantly, Republicans in Congress could have done that. And when you
Hmm.
look at how Republicans in Congress chose to interact with international development budgets, with foreign aid budgets, the only thing they ever objected to was abortion stuff. They would say, okay, we're in control of the budget now. Whatever programming you have related to providing abortions, we're going to cut that out. And that was a process you'd see when the budgets were like adjudicated every time, uh, that the House switched to Republican. And so but the thing about that is the reason Republican lawmakers were able to do that is that pro life activists are so good that they were just sending Republican House offices like, here are the programs that support abortion. You need to pull funding for these when you're in control of the House and like the next funding thing comes up. The next budget is adjudicated. But there was no other for these other weird issues like gender stuff or trans stuff. There was not an organ like in other words, the Republican Congress people don't do their jobs, or they only do their jobs when there are like unpaid NGOs or nonprofits on the right that make it their job to be like, hey, there's all this programming that goes against our beliefs that taxpayers pay for. Please pull this. So, like, that's all stuff that could have happened without a president like Trump and without Elon. But, like, so I guess the way people do talk about this is they've been like, yes, I guess the phrase they use is like, GOP has been revealed as controlled opposition. But I think that even implies that, like, all these Congress members were okay with it, whereas I think they weren't paying attention, which is why I prefer to say like they weren't doing their jobs, because it could have
Hmm.
been a political win for lots of people to be like, why is there, why are we doing $2 million for, the most famous example I get is like teaching Afghan women about like postmodern gender stuff. Like they could have brought that up at any time. So I almost feel like Elon, by presenting public information as if it was hidden, he's like letting some people off the hook, because everyone's acting like, oh, we uncovered all this fraud and abuse. And it's like, it's not fraud and abuse. It's wasting money on extremely progressive projects that don't really have an impact. I mean, I've worked close to them. I do not believe, and this is an argument I have with people too. Like I think in some ways the most offensive part about this is that it doesn't work. Like I may think that because my purview was in the Middle East, where maybe like the values of the host society and the values expressed in US programming are most at odds. But like this shit is so weird. Like another story I could tell that's really odd. Maybe I'll try to take the US out of it. But I think like years ago in the early part of the Syrian civil war, there was a situation where like the British embassy or somebody was paying an organization I worked for to like develop local female leaders in liberated parts of Syria. And I'd go to my boss and be like, "How are you finding these people?" And he'd be like, "Well, what's like a leader? Like we just, in a town where we have an office, we just tell the women, like, show up to this thing, you'll get $100, you'll get the phone numbers of some people in the U.S. government, and then like you'll be on a list of like people who might be citizen journalists or might, you'll be on a list as having attended this training. So when more grants come down the pike, like you'll be a known entity. So just like tell your sister, tell your cousins to show up for this thing because there'll be more benefits down the road." And so I sort of said to him privately, and this is how some people think about it. I don't know if it's always like this, but I said to him privately, like, "Oh, so this is sort of like fake. It's just a way to get money to the side of this civil war that we like." And like to put that in more explicit terms, like these were Sunni Arabs. It's like the US wants to support Sunni Arabs for political reasons. We don't have non clandestine direct military support to the rebels. So we're doing like weird civil society support, but nobody's looking into who are these women that we bring to the seminar. So the real story is just like, we support the Sunni Arabs. We're going to find ways to give them money and like give grants to their fake NGOs and all this stuff. And I should say, there's a spectrum of how fake it is. There may have been some people at that seminar who really were like active citizen journalists, but I think in most cases you're trying to find people because there's not enough pre-existing figures to like make it make sense. But the thing that disappointed me is I always wanted the funder to acknowledge this as well. Like in this instance, for the British to be like, we don't really care about, like developing grassroots female leadership. Like this is just a cover for supporting Sunnis in the war. But like they wouldn't say that. They really believed in the cover story. And so I was always sort of dumbfounded, like why do they believe in this? So all of this is to say, like, I have a very skeptical and cynical view of this type of programming. But the other thing I see, and I've been talking to my government employee friends about, is that there's sort of an established like uh, tech investment banker startup or acquisitions way to fix a company that Musk did with Twitter, which is like, you break everything that you can, you fire everyone that you can, and then after you do that, problems emerge because like you accidentally removed load bearing columns, and then as those
Yeah.
problems present themselves, you staff back up just to address those problems. And so in that way you figure out what programming was very important.
Yeah, don't they have a name? It's like zero based budgeting or something like that. Um they talked about it on the All In podcast, talking about
Okay.
when Musk bought Twitter. Like one of the first week, they just like turned off all the corporate credit cards, and then they started getting calls from like all these software vendors saying like, "Hey, we noticed that your payment didn't go through this week or this month." And then they'd be like, "Well, what was the payment for?" They're like, "Well, you guys had 1,000 licenses for this like Adobe product." And then like Musk would look around the company and be like, "Who even uses this Adobe product?" And there's like 4 people that use it. He's like, "Okay, well, we'll turn it back on, but for 4, not 1,000." That sort of thing.
Yeah, so I don't I certainly don't have a problem with that methodology in the private sector, and I can see advantages to applying it. Because what must be frustrating from their point of view is anytime you want to change anything in government, people say like, "Well, here are the labor protections, um, our employees have. Here's the buy-in you need to get from longtime civil servants to make this change," and it's just like immediately you can't do anything. There's all these barriers. So I'm totally sympathetic to why they'd be like tear it to the ground and rebuild it up. But I guess my concerns are related to like it seems like what's happened so far is that canceling programming is much easier than actually firing people. And so I think from a taxpayer perspective, that might end up being like the worst of all worlds, where like a lot of programming, including, whatever minority of services are important, get paused or can't be executed, but we're still paying for most of the people, like the salaries, which is a significant component of the budget. And then there's all these other weird dynamics that strike me as unique to government. Maybe they're not as unique as I think, but like, for example, if you fire everyone um, from a private company, but then you figure out who was good, you can sort of rehire them quickly. And also, I imagine, go to a bank or another firm and be like, "Here's what we're trying to restructure or bring back. Please give us money. We know exactly what it takes." But like both funding and staffing in the government work kind of differently. So like I guess I'd be worried that when they want to rebuild new things, they won't be able to it's like everybody says destruction is easier than creation, but I think in the case of government that might be particularly true. And there's other weird international dynamics. Like I actually do assume there's some level of USAID programming that, if nothing else, is extremely useful to US allies. And the type of situation I imagine is like there might be an African country right now that's like out of cycle with its grain harvest, and that they really rely on like USAID engineers or engineers from Europe or the Middle East who are ultimately funded by USAID, who like really help them uh, have like a more efficient crop yield, and they don't have that domestic talent. And like right now, they aren't able to say in public, "Hey, we're going to be screwed if we don't have this," because the way their population looks at it is like, "Oh, the Imperial Americans are gone." So the leaders in public have to be like, "Yeah, it's good. We don't care. Like, development is fake. We can do it ourselves." But that's not true. And then if those countries get into trouble, I mean, I guess it'll be to some extent up to Trump, but the precedent on the world stage up till now has been that when those disasters happen, like the U.S. Is the one who steps in to lead emergency response. Usually, there are exceptions. So I worry about that sort of thing. On the other hand, I don't know that I feel a little chastened because I don't know that I could suggest something better. Because the thing you see sort of moderate people saying is like, you should adjudicate each employee. Like there's lots of good people. Don't just fire everyone. Find out who's on your side and who's not. And it's like, yeah, but if you do that, one, you're at some level selecting for who's the best liar,
Yeah.
who can switch on the fly and present themselves as a secret maggot, but also that takes too long. Like
Yes, time is the thing I wanted to get to, but yeah, keep going.
so I don't know. I guess all I'm revealing is that like I'm sort of a pussy because like what's what's clear about Trump and Elon is that like they have the balls to break stuff, and they're willing to handle everyone yelling at them and saying it's not smart and it's dangerous. And I can acknowledge that anyone who was ever going to change the culture and size of the government, it would almost have to play out like this. Like I'm not sure there is another way. But
Yeah,
that being said, I still have concerns about it.
that's my suspicion as well. That's what I think it comes down to. I think it's an issue of time. It feels like they have they have you know they have Congress and they have the Supreme Court. They kind of have both of those right now, and it just seems like they have about 18 months to do anything they're going to do. Like 18 months is when everything happens, and then the rest of the presidency, especially if they don't, if they lose Congress, which I don't know. It's hard. It seems like it's always hard to keep your Congress at a midterm election, and if they lose it, especially. But even if they don't lose it, it's like the second half of your term is like defending whatever you did in the first half, and like seeing if you could, trying to not trying to prevent your opponents from like undoing stuff. And so yeah, it does feel like they had to just be super fast. And given like the size and scale of everything, it's kind of makes sense that they had to act the way they did. And also, to the thing about like Elon, like treating these things like they're new. You have to be fast, but you also have to be like you really have to dumb things down, and you have to like the sensationalism of like treating it like it's new is, I think, helpful in selling it. And it's like I don't like that this is the reality, right? Like I would prefer that, like, oh, we just have this well-informed populace, and you could have a rational interaction with the public if you're an elected official, but you kind of can't, and
I think that's totally right. I guess I wonder if it might have been an equally appealing spectacle to reference when budgets were approved
yeah,
instead of saying look at this fraud and abuse, say can you believe the 2018 Congress approved this? Can you believe the following Republicans voted for this? Or
yeah, and I
didn't
guess,
make
well, the problem
I guess
there
that
is it's
creates
like,
like internal dynamics that are
yeah,
hard.
you don't need like you can't afford like a single, like in the Senate, like you cannot afford a single enemy right now,
Yeah.
um I know that it's like it's similar in the Congress. It's like, yeah, you don't want to, you don't want an enemy. You don't want to create any drama. Like you want to incentivize people to just stay going along with you, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I guess
anyway, I
I
mean,
guess
yeah.
I can make my fear more succinct, which is that it seems like the hardest thing they're trying to do is fire people. And I think intelligently they probably realized that actually firing tons of people was going to be difficult. So they're creating a chaotic and alienating environment in which they hope the most people will voluntarily leave. But I guess my concern is that at the end of this, only like 5 to 7% of the federal workforce will have left, which is a very significant achievement. I'm not trying to poo poo
Well,
that, but they
here's
will
this
have
is the
I worry they will have messed with the processes so much that we'll have that slight shrink in federal staffing size, but it'll be significantly degraded in its ability to do things with the money it has because they've, potentially taken out key cogs in personnel, like made paying for things more difficult. And maybe that's good. I don't know. I always was more drawn to the idea of take these institutions and try to put them up, like reinvent the programming to things you think are good as you draw down things that you think can't be rehabilitated, as opposed to just break them. But I don't know that that's
yeah,
possible either.
that's a big concern I have with Elon specifically. Trump, I assume, would be somewhat open to this. I don't know that Trump and Vance would object to this, but I think Elon might not get this, but like it's not good enough to just be a libertarian and slash all these agencies. Like you should probably put something in its place with different people. Like it's not enough to like kill the old patronage network. You have to have your own. Like there's enough people that don't really care either way. what goes on. They just want to like they just need to be taken care of. And I'm talking about like at a just society level. Like there's a lot of just I don't know what the numbers are, but it's like maybe the middle 75% or something, middle 80%
Yeah,
that don't.
I think I do agree though with the Yarvin point that it's like if you wanted a right wing State Department, the way to do that is to undermine and cripple the State Department and then create something new that ends up. But like if you that the original institution is so infected with a certain worldview that like it's easier to start from scratch uh than to change the nature of it. That may be true.
Yeah, and maybe this is a later phase thing, but
Yeah.
I do worry a little bit when and this is not just because I want to see this for my friends, like for the listeners of this show, like I think we know people who would be good, and we know people now who've taken some like government roles and stuff, and we know other people who would be good for those type of roles. So it's not just because I want to see that happen for them, um, but also like uh, it just seems like it needs to they need to create an avenue for that, and maybe that's a second phase thing. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
the other thing that makes me mad about Elon is like I just don't care if people's jobs are fake. And now I understand the idea that like being in a fake job on the taxpayer dole is more outrageous. I think that's true, but I also don't buy the idea that like public sector jobs are so much faker than the private sector. I feel like most people I know work in the private sector and they have something like an email job. Like I think the average culture of a private sector job today is much closer to the culture of a uh, public sector bureaucrat than 30 or 40 years in the past. I think we're facing a reality where like somewhere between 80 and 99% of people are not actually economically productive, like in a
yeah,
measurable
yeah, yeah,
way.
yeah.
Their utility to the economy is basically nil unless unless you consider sort of fudgy things like, well, people, you know, they raise morale in the office, or like they make things flow like 1% smoother. In other words, like they might have some measurable utility, but there's no way that it justifies their wage. And so like I sort of feel like we're already, and this disrupts like the whole conversation about welfare and anything, because I have always felt since I've been in the workforce, and I've worked for NGOs and in the private sector, and I've never worked for the government directly. And everywhere I've worked, I've felt like most people don't pull their weight, and that this is obviously like a structural component of the economy. Too many people get college degrees. And if you had some really withering adjudication of everybody's economic value, like none of us would have jobs. So it's obvious that like the real function of the structure of the economy is not just to employ people, but to sort of employ people at a wage that has some relationship to their social class and like what they're expecting. And even with that, we have like a huge hollowing out of the middle class and everyone not doing as well as their parents. So it's like, if anything, I think the economy needs to get faker. Like like currently the economy can support you know, a person with like a sociology degree whose parents lived in a nice suburb, who currently makes like 120 grand doing absolute fucking nonsense for like a marketing firm. You know, they like respond to emails about whether the vertical you know, on a website they're doing for some client looks good. It's like it's totally useless, and they make like 120 grand, and that means they have to rent and they can't have a family. It's like that person isn't going anywhere and they need to make 200 grand so that they can own property and have a family. So like I'm not interested in a process that's like, oh, actually that person's contribution to the economy is 30 grand. It's like, yes, yeah, so what? Like we can't have everyone living like that, and they're not all going to learn to code. It's like all the more sophisticated jobs you're about to make irrelevant with AI. So like I just think we're clearly getting away from the idea. I mean, I don't want to endorse like an AI planned economy or something. Like, in other words, I understand the danger of just being like, people's wages are already so decoupled from real value that let's just put all the money in a big pot and like give everyone the same wage. I know that's not true. I know there's real value in like rewarding hard workers and people who are closer to the money. So I don't want to abandon like the trappings of capitalist incentives. It's good that we still have them, but yeah, I believe deep in my bones that most people are not economically productive in any meaningful way, including and maybe especially like PMC college educated people. And so yeah, going into any industry and being like, if you're not a fucking grinder hustler, like you're out of here. I just assume any real broad process like that would unemploy literally everyone, except for maybe like SpaceX or whatever. Like maybe Elon does run a tight ship. I would sort of believe that there are smaller tech firms where actually the majority of their employees are productive. But I
Well,
think
yeah, I think if you
that's
make a
rare.
physical thing that does a thing in the real world, if you make a rocket or you make a car, it's pretty easy to determine like how much of your labor force does something and whether or not it's valuable. Um, and I think Elon does run his companies pretty lean and all that. I do. Yeah, he keeps talking about though, like he's like, well, look, we're moving people from an unproductive category of government work to like they'll eventually go to more productive um private sector work. And I don't see the vision there exactly, because like I think like what you were saying about the economic productivity of an individual, a lot of the people, I I don't I don't know that they can do anything that provides any value to most companies. I'm not trying to be like I don't want to count things out that I don't know about, because there are all sorts of jobs, there are all parts of the economy that's like you learn all the time. You're like, oh, that person does that. Like I didn't realize that was a job. Like I didn't realize someone needed to do that, but it makes sense. And um yeah, I'm just like not sure. Like what are people going to be, and the other aspect of this is like the immigration thing. Like okay, if you actually remove a lot of immigrant labor, and okay, well, like maybe some of the people who worked at in the government who would be capable of like building a house, maybe they can like build a house now, and maybe that um and maybe we can pay house builders a little more because we don't have the immigrant labor. And like that solves like some of it. Like some of those people who are working in the government are going to move into maybe like blue skilled but blue collar work. But yeah, I just don't know. Like you look at a lot of those people, like you've seen the stuff about how like I think it was 60% of Black women with a college degree work in the public sector.
Yeah, that
It's
was one
like,
of those stats that's like simultaneously not surprising, but also sort of mind blowing.
well, it's also one of those things where like I just recently saw this. It was shared from like a sympathetic or left leaning source. They're like, oh, DOGE is making Black women unemployed, and it's like, well, but it's strange of you to admit that like the government was basically a jobs program for Black women. Like that's what this was, and it's like but a lot of those women, like, what are they going to go do that's like
Well,
actually valuable to
I can
someone?
I can talk about what they might go do, but I think I do just want to defend for a minute. Like, I think, like, if you go to parts of Maryland, obviously not Baltimore,
PG, you talking about like PG, like Prince
yeah,
George's
like
or whatever? Yeah.
this part of the country. I mean, I don't know if I'm just going to reveal myself as a squish here, but like this part of the country has a real black middle class, and like if we take away the specific political problems of the day, like, someone could present it in a different way where I might be less sympathetic. Like if someone said like, should the government use taxpayer money to create a black middle class at the expense of middle class people of other races? I might say no. But living here, it is definitely not a bad thing for the region that like the black population here uh, is more educated and has good jobs. And like, I suspect there will be real social fallout if that ends. And I guess what I'm saying is like, because I'm okay with the idea of fake jobs for people, uh, you can see in the DMV that there's particular parts of the black community that are like less sociologically pathological than say similar black communities in the South, precisely because um they have this like federal jobs thing going on, this patronage network. And again, it's totally fine and a part of politics to say like we want who gets the patronage to change slightly. But I think that's different than just saying wherever we find patronage, we'll destroy it. Because like my vision, my vision of government is that a lot of useless middle class people should be employed, and that like the government, you know, to do whatever, and that the government might be particularly well suited to employing those people. And so if there's a region of the country that's like particularly black, or perhaps because of these policies has ended up particularly black, that's not like de facto offensive to me. Now when you factor in things like how democratic that block is, and all the feedback loops that that creates, like that is a little bad, I guess. But I don't know, I want, again, like, do people remember college? Like I went to sort of the 36th uh most, you know, by rankings, impressive undergraduate university in the country. I could go weeks without meeting another person who is intellectually curious at all. And like none of those people will fight in a war before they'll work in a field. And like they don't know anything about history, they can't do math. Like what do you want those people to do? Um I guess they could
Yeah.
all like cold call, you know, selling Starlink. Um but I
Yeah,
don't
I
know,
mean, like,
you have to
j
do something with those people, and some of them aren't white. And like I kind of think it's fine if they get sinecures. But one thing that's funny about like what jobs will they get is like the dream job I always want is, and that I apply for, but which I'm now not going to get because they're going to go to 20-year veterans of the civil service, is like Google and Microsoft and Lyft and Uber and uh, every single tech company now has an office here in DC, and they have policy and government relations teams. And
yeah.
they're like, they're closely, sometimes they're lawyers, and sometimes they work closely with lawyers. And a lot of what they do is like, if you work on like policy within the trust and safety team or like within the copyright team for YouTube, what they want you to do is be like, meet with people on relevant committees in the House and Senate and see what legislation is coming out about censorship, about copyright. What is the FCC going to do? And again, like, if you really kick ass at that, if you're really prescient and your connections are really good, and you give your bosses like a very good, you know, forecast of the legislative environment, you are definitely worth your money. But my high suspicion, especially given like the chaotic political environment we're in, is that the average person in that job does not do a good job at all forecasting what's going to happen. I mean, they may put them in. One of the other things is like they put these companies in a position to have more direct access to lawmakers, which is also. But my point is like, depending on your skill is hard to judge. There may be external things that like totally throw your personal talent at the position, like that make it sort of irrelevant. And like they make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and it's one of those things where it's like if you get it right, you're worth millions of dollars, and if you get it wrong, you're worth negative money. But like
Mhm.
no one is adjudicated that way. Like,
Well, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm aware of that whole government affairs, industry. My assumption would be that they have. I would assume that they are a little bit not great at modeling like the conservative or flyover mind.
well, I think um you bring up an interesting point, but I think one of the problems with the model is that they're not supposed to model the public, really. They're supposed to model representatives and legislation. But one
Well,
of the
but
ways,
like by extension, like they're not understanding like what a congressman from like what pressures a congressman from Louisiana might face.
yes, like this is, I think AI is such an interesting issue because, like, it seems right now, especially from things JD Vance has said and his relationship with Elon and Peter Thiel and all these people and Dreesen, it seems like this is a pro AI administration. And like I expect that to continue. Their view seems to be someone is going to develop this, and the best way to protect yourself is have America be the industry leader and innovator, not be catching up to China. And I sort of grudgingly accept that I would probably come to the same conclusion if I was them. But things could definitely happen, like exogenous events that really change what like MAGA voters think about AI. And yeah, if that happens, like having a congressman uh, have made promises to you like over a lunch isn't going to matter at all. Or if Trump for some reason decides he feels differently about it, again, like the things that leaders of relevant committees told you in a private meeting isn't going to matter. So like yeah, that is why those jobs are hard. I think in general it's like the government affairs people are in charge of the relationships, like having juice with the actual elected officials so that you can influence them. And then the policy people, it's more like modeling like what would be an ideal policy from our perspective, and also how would we respond with our products and internal policies if a suboptimal law was passed. Like how are we gonna, so that's I think, I mean, I've never had one of these jobs, but I apply to them all the time, so I have some sense, and I think that's sort of like the division of labor. But yeah, like the thing that's really really changed is that, and I guess there was some of this with Obama, but Obama didn't really do anything with it, is that like in the past, the parties made the rules. So like as a firm that's trying to influence politics, the prospect of like a guy at the top changing his mind and every member of Congress having to fall in line, that just wasn't a thing. And now that is a thing. So all those jobs are much harder and potentially not as worth the money that they cost.
Yeah. Well, if anyone's listening, hire degree studies for your policy affairs or whatever team.
Yeah, I'm sure it's very appealing that I regularly go on podcasts and dish about all this stuff. I think
Yeah.
that's what they're looking for.
I mean, I think people should hire you. I think people should hire me. If anyone ever wants to hire me or anyone that appears in this show, just let me know. Um, all right,
Yeah,
let's. Oh
if
yeah,
you are committed to Midwit Sinecures, DM me, uh, and I will give you my number.
yeah. Sometimes I feel like I believe in this stuff. I believe in I'll call it, like you said, the midwit sinecure. Like I just know a lot of people have them, and it's like, but the sort of, but I also happen to be aligned with the people who temperamentally have a hard time with them. Like, um, conservatives, they get it. I mean, they have some of them too. Like they have plenty. They know that they kind of have to like pay people or whatever to keep them in line or keep them quiet or but they have a hard time with the idea of like just like paying people to agree with them for years on end. And
Yeah,
um
and now that we're 50 minutes in, I'll just say, and I'm not sure this is happening. This is just my fear that like the old conservative coalition, there were religious people in it too. But then the other two groups were free marketers and neocons. And we've seen lots of examples of neocons, like I guess through Jared Kushner and certain donors. Like in the first Trump administration, especially, we saw neocons get into the administration and how neocons sort of used um, certain culture war things, or like kissing the ring of Trump to insinuate themselves in, even though like our whole movement is supposed to be that they aren't welcome. And I think what was good at the time is that people were aware of that that was happening and talking about it in those terms. You know, they'd sort of be like, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo haven't changed. They're just showing some deference to Trump so that they can get old world Republican politics into this new paradigm. And I think people should consider that that's just what the tech right is doing with like Reaganomics. Like, really, what they're about is deregulation, you know, pursuing technology like above all else, and sort of to some extent like public austerity. And I think like that is not the MAGA vision. Like the MAGA vision is like Fortress America, where if you've been here for a while, you're taken care of. Like that's the vision I support. And so I'm comfortable with like a strategic alliance with the tech right to get certain things done. And I don't even think I mind deregulation, but like I do think at the end of the day, the vision of those people for the future of America is probably at odds with this movement. Though I'm open to visions of synthesis. Like I know, you know, our rabbi, Dr. Bennett, he's like he's in touch with these worlds and he pushes back sometimes in the same way I would. But I, you know, he's a person who's good at synthesizing what are the good parts of this that do align and could be taken. But I think for my own part, I'm very like suspicious of such people. And to me, it just seems like, yes, it's a different economic sector, but these guys are basically the same as like Wall Street.
Hmm. Okay, I'm gonna move on to. I've not been on Twitter since we've been talking, so I think we're missing out probably on some good action on Twitter right now, because right before we started recording, like 20 minutes before, the video of Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office and Vance, the video of them arguing dropped. Um, did you see it?
Yes.
Um, what'd you think?
Um, I have two very different things to say about it. The first is a point that's been made a lot, but I think it's worth repeating. It is not true that politics in general in American history, even in recent history, features like decorum and respectability. That's like a very novel post war thing. And I even think it's like a post war Anglo thing. And like global politics has always been like men on TV measuring their dicks. And so I think a certain irony here is that like why this politics works is because the country's brown. Like because our population is now a global population, lots and lots of Americans don't see this as embarrassing. They're like, yeah,
Ah,
that's
okay. So
fine.
this is just World Star.
Yes, exactly. World star politics. Like I saw some people calling it like uh real housewification of American politics. And it's like that's like a clever left wing or liberal dodge because it's a way to refer to uh like lowbrow plebeianness uh of like bread and circuses, but it's not like minority coded. Whereas like I do think there's an ethnic, like the stuffiest people, the people who are most about propriety and decorum, that was like a minority of whites since the Ellis Island people came in. And so it was always very difficult, I think, to impose that on like the real mass of the American public. But now that's just done. Like your population's too diverse, uh, and they don't care about that. Like maybe it's related to caudillo politics, maybe it's just like everyone's stupid, but whatever it is, it's like this is the population you asked for, and this does not alienate them. So that's a big part of it. And then the other
Well, I was
part is
gonna real quick. I was gonna go to earlier when you're talking about Elon oversimplifying things. Like I did want to bring up just Elon. Both Elon and Trump are both incredible salesmen, and they know that you need to like oversimplify things. And then this here is like Trump is just like, they talk about like what JFK was the first TV president or whatever. Trump is like the first guy to really get TV. Um, Yeah, he just really understands the spectacle and like putting this like it's not an accident that there's like 20 cameras in the room. Like he's like we're gonna bully this guy and it's gonna be on camera and I want people to see it. And it's anyway, continue.
Do you think he's televisual, or do you think he gets the internet? Because I don't have an opinion, but I've seen it
He's like
argued that actually his rhetoric is perfectly designed for the internet because like his mimetic phrases, his expressions, uh, he creates like moments that are so brief they're perfect for like retweets even more than they would be for like loops on Fox News or whatever.
yeah, it's like he's sort of he's the first internet president too. They like to say that about Obama because it's and all Obama did was like have accounts. Like he had an account on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, and like that was like oh wow, you know he's breaking the mold. but but Trump like actually inhabits that space. Like he like is of that you know he's of that environment. But he's also just like really understands just media in general. He just really understands it at like at, at such a core level. Like in how to dominate a conversation and to frame things like to use the medium to frame whatever he wants to do at any given time. So I don't know, I guess I would like, is he more internet or more TV? It's like I don't know, just media. He's just so good at all of it.
You could also say that like I mean I'm just thinking out loud now, but that he actually has to dominate both of those because like his televisual mastery explains his dominance with boomers, and then his internet mastery explains like his weird connection with certain types of young people,
Yeah,
including
yeah,
people like us, though maybe at least me, I'm not that young anymore. But the other thing I wanted to say about Zelensky is like, of all the objections to elements of Trump's movement, I think Ukraine stuff and suspicion of Trump's desire for peace in various parts of the world is the one I'm most confused by. I had a very, very smart friend uh, texting me in an absolute conniption over uh, the U.S. voting against this resolution to condemn Russia at the UN, and like this is such to me an insight into um, the weird worldview of like post-war international liberals, globalists, neocons, whatever you want to call them. They do this weird thing. Like when you study negotiations in political science, and I think even in business, you sort of understand that like uh you there can be situations where you have a party on your side that has become more problematic than your theoretical adversary, and that like you have a view either as someone who's overseeing talks or someone who just wants a certain outcome from negotiations. And there's all this conventional wisdom that I don't really understand. Like people, again, sort of propriety and decorum. People are like, it's disrespectful. It breaks precedent. Like to vote against Ukraine, even as you're sending them money and arms in the UN, like you're not providing them maximum leverage and stuff. And I think the stuff Trump and Vance have said in public about this, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like the way I view it is the people they are trying to move are Zelensky and his clique. They have looked at it and said, like, Russia is willing to agree to a ceasefire within terms that the current US administration finds acceptable. And the Ukrainian leadership does not find those terms acceptable. So, because the US's current goal under this administration is a ceasefire and is less concerned about, I guess, like long term security guarantees and what exact territory switches hands, like their goal towards achieving peace, peace being their goal, is to move Zelensky. And so they have a lot of leverage, right? They can vote against him at the UN and embarrass him. They can embarrass him in public as they did today. And of course, they can withdraw money and arms. And like, I don't understand because people seem to be saying like it's fine that their perspective is that peace should be achieved and that Ukraine should agree to it, but they say not only that it's wrong but that it's anti-strategic to embarrass them in public like this. And I don't understand why. Like, they're not playing ball with the president right now. What can you do besides? And there's this attitude, like I saw Io was like, oh, like threatening your vassal is fine, but obviously you do it behind closed doors. Why? Zelensky talks shit about the U.S. position in the press all the time. Like, there's
Well,
no
this is what I mean about the television stuff. It's like not a mistake. It's like Trump and Vance decided, okay, well now is like they've had this conversation before, I assume, or some to some degree. Like they've had it behind closed doors, or maybe a softer version of it. But now they're like, look, he's not getting it, or at least not getting it the way we want him to. So we're gonna have to do this out in public. Like he's just like it's just another tool in the toolkit. And yeah, you're saying that like that account is like saying, oh, this is breaking a norm, or it's like, well, okay, but maybe people in the past just weren't using the tools available to them.
yes. So there's two portrayals of this meeting today that I've seen in the media, and I obviously don't know which one is true, but there's one I would bet on. The mainstream media seems to be saying like this wasn't the plan, but the meeting spun out of control because like Vance lost control of himself and then Zelensky lost control of himself. And then there are some MAGA people saying the reason they're so pissed at Zelensky is that he's agreed to their terms in private, but then in public he backtracks and tries to prompt sort of Western media and other people that support him to apply pressure to the Trump regime or the Trump presidency, I should say, and that's why they decided to embarrass him in public because he's been triangulating in a way that pisses them off. And again, I don't have the inside track to know which one better describes it, but I suspect the MAGA version of events is real. That they actually did pay him the courtesy of trying to have the come to Jesus moment behind closed doors, but it didn't work and they're out of patience. So now they're embarrassing him. And from my perspective, that's totally fine. Like the war needs to end.
What so for people who don't really pay super close attention to it, what like I mean, what do like we call them like Ukraine shills or whatever online, like the people with the Ukraine flag in bio. Like, what do they realistically expect at this point? They want America to boots on the ground, like tell Russia it's over, expel them, like what, and like Ukraine loses no territory, nothing. Like, what do they expect? Like, what's the outcome they want?
Yeah, this is a tough question to answer because I'll tell you how I look at it. And people could argue with my laying out of events or what I think is possible. But like to me, Ukraine has lost some territory. And in some of the places they've lost, uh, there are populations there, especially now that it's been sort of sorted by the war, that even before the war, a significant proportion of the population was more pro Russian than pro Ukraine. I mean, maybe those people are traitors. I don't care. I'm not from there. That's just like a demographic reality of the conflict. It's more true in some places than others. Perhaps some places that Russia holds, it's not true at all. But like Donbass or whatever, it's definitely the case. And so the sort of international worldview that the Ukrainians appeal to is it is not acceptable in the 21st century for one neighbor who's mad at another neighbor to just invade, especially when the country that's being invaded is a NATO ally. So the thing they always say is like, if you let that happen, you've now given a sign to dictators and revanchist states around the world that invading countries is okay, and NATO and the United States specifically will not have the will to stop you. Well, that's a perfectly sound observation, except for the fact that, like, that reality is just obviously true. People can invade each other, and NATO and the United States will not stop them. That's literally why we didn't stop them. And there's a very clear
Yeah.
if you think it's existentially important to stop them, there's a thing that you do, which is you send your own troops. And what's very interesting to me is that none of the people who think it's essential to keep this war going ever suggest that American or European troops should go. which is obviously what you would do if you actually thought it was an existential threat. Like if you actually believed that 10 years after Russia invades Ukraine, they're going to invade Berlin. If a critical mass of Germans really believed that, then there would be Germans fighting in Ukraine, and there aren't, and there'd probably be Americans too. So like, and to the extent that if there are members of the European Parliament or the American Congress that do want to send Western troops to Ukraine, I think that would be escalatory and bad. But at least they would have like a
But would at least
coherent,
show some sincerity and conviction.
right. And what they usually say to, if you say like, why don't you want to send troops, they'll say like, well, that's escalatory and Russia is a nuclear power, you can't have that. Well, all that is you're admitting that Russia has enough leverage that you can't do whatever you want to Russia. Like you're sort of saying, because the way that shakes out is you're like, it's worth every Ukrainian dying to enforce this norm, but it's not worth a single American or German dying. Okay, well, I'm a Christian, so like I don't really view things that. I think that means you're going to lose, and so you should stop the hemorrhaging of Ukrainian and Russian lives, because like I don't think these territorial boundaries are sacrosanct, and I think obviously we already live in a world where people go to war with each other all the time, not fearing the U.S. or European response that much. So like that's where you live now.
In international relations, you would call this realism?
I guess so. But I think the thing is, everyone's a realist to the extent that you are bound to argue within the plane of things that you think are possible. And what's really weird on the international side is that they have to argue that a sufficiently armed and financially supported Ukrainian side could take back all of what Russia has gained, not with US or Western troops, just with all the correct money and arms supplied. And I don't know why they believe that. Um, and it's weird because even, the Biden administration would say things like that, would sort of pretend to agree with that, but then would still withhold certain weapon systems from Ukraine. So it's like, well, you're actually trying, like, it makes it seem like from the Biden administration's perspective, what was important or good about the war was an opportunity to bleed Russia, to kill Russians and make the war last and cost Russia more, not to liberate Ukraine, because they never gave them enough except to lose slowly. So I sort of think like the NAFO academics and the people in the public, like they're rubes, because like, even the Democrats, they did not behave in a way that suggests they thought Ukraine, quote unquote, winning was existentially important. And you would even see the NAFO people criticize Biden, but like they sort of criticized him as if he was dumb, like didn't know what it took to win, as opposed to didn't want Ukrainians to have weapons that would make Russia escalate. So like I think even if you're an average Ukrainian, you would probably think like, yeah, the international motivations for this war are like a weird blood feud with Russia that has nothing to do with like the future territorial boundaries of our country or what political system we have. So like this is bad. And then if you want to explain why like Zelensky and his clique uh, want it to keep going, I think they individually will be out of power and maybe even in personal danger when this ends. And so they have no motivation to be reasonable, which is why potentially it's important to embarrass them on TV and vote against them at the UN. Like, I don't know. To me, it all seems eminently reasonable if your goal is to end the war without particular care for like what the borders exactly are. And I don't see why Americans would care about that. Like,
Hmm.
the conflict has seemingly been in stasis with Russia making slow marginal gains for a long time now. We used to have news cycles about the coming Ukrainian offensive that was going to reverse that. We don't even have that anymore.
Yeah.
There hasn't been one of those in like a year. So
So everything. So what you're saying is sort of intuitively where I've been at, and I did at one time actually study international relations, but I was never a good student. So this is like refreshing my memory on some of this. I do have people in my life who are very big Ukraine boosters, because they have like ties to the country, and I've like not I've not wanted to engage with them on this because because basically everything you're saying, I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but like I just don't, I guess it's like when you're Russia, you might have to let them do it. Like you might have to let them take a little bit of your country or something. I don't know a
Yeah,
reasonable way to undo what has happened.
I should say for the record, I'm like extremely sympathetic to Ukrainian nationalists.
Well, and people look at it like every time I just see these people like I've people I know who are into Ukraine, like they're on Facebook and stuff. And they're like, Russia started the war. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm sure that they did. I saw that. Like, I'm aware of this, but I could like, what does that mean for us right now? Like, what does that mean? Like, they started it. Yep, that's true. But like, what does that mean for
Right.
America?
Well, I guess
Basically,
this is a good opportunity to make the realist distinction, because I do think a part of realism, as I understand it, is saying that your goal is to get to a robust, lasting peace, and you are less concerned with adjudicating blame for why the violence started in the first place. And
yeah.
I am, I think people even on the right get too caught up in that, where NAFO says Russia invaded, and then the sort of like Thomas 77 historians and a lot of realist people are like, no, no, no. NATO made commitments about not expanding east, and then Clinton brought in these other countries, and then everybody said, started playing footsie with Ukraine. Like at some point, Russia has to respond, and like I just don't care about that at all. And like I'm even willing to cede to some people like, yes, we fucked around and broke promises, but Russia rolled tanks across a border, and that's bad. Like, uh, I think that's fine to say that's bad, and it also means the war is their fault, even if their direct kinetic military activity was a response to sort of political intrigue in which we were provoking them. Like, that's fine. We're the empire. That's what we do. We try to get you to fuck up. And like, I think they fucked up. The thing is, there's just no connection between the moral status of the initiation of the war and how you end it. Like,
Yeah.
especially in 2025, like there was maybe a time before the Iraq war and the beginning of the Iraq war where you could say like everyone or we're entering an age where everyone in the international community has a sense of what the rules are, and enforcing the rules is really important, because if you don't enforce the rules, we'll have a chaotic environment. Well, guess what? We have a chaotic environment, and we are not particularly close to reestablishing like universal deterrence. Like
Now,
it is, yeah.
I was gonna say last thing on the Ukraine thing that I want to cover. What's the deal with this mineral thing? And is it like, to me? I know Trump and like sort of the broader MAGA world has been like criticized for not supporting supporting Ukraine enough, and then the last week or two, it seemed like Trump had been like, hey, I think we're gonna get somewhere with Ukraine. I think we're gonna figure it out, and these minerals are gonna be part of it. Like they're gonna pay us back for all this money we gave them in the form of letting us extract minerals, I guess. What's that all about?
Um, I think Trump's. I don't totally know what to say about this. It's a because it doesn't make sense to me that like maybe this will seem like a dumb question, but like if we find like they just found lithium in Pennsylvania or whatever. Like I assume the U.S. government could take some steps to say like we're going to have a domestic firm extract the uranium, and like we hope, or sorry, the lithium, and we hope much of that lithium it'll be like processed in other countries, but we hope it's going to products, and they could even make a contract with the firm extracting the lithium like towards that end. But it always surprises me when like two democratic states with theoretically open economies are sort of talking about natural resources in this particular way, because uh, it's not like there's some state entity that's going to go mine minerals and
Yeah.
send them back to the U.S. Like, because this was a dynamic with oil too in Iraq. Like the problem with Saddam, it's not that like we needed the barrels to be shipped to Texas. It's that we wanted the barrels to be hitting the international oil market, and for Saddam not to stop pumping or burn off oil to affect oil prices and like fuck with OPEC or whatever else we were trying to achieve. And so like the issue was not so much that like this needs to be controlled by Exxon, as like you had this one sort of bizarre and hard to control Middle Eastern player who could sort of individually impact like how much oil was getting to market. And I don't understand why it would be so important. uh like I guess I guess it's the concern is that especially if the US and Ukraine were not on good terms, because China does so much processing of raw materials and putting it into products, that like if the US doesn't have guarantees about rights, maybe the assumption is it would go to China. But I don't totally understand it, and I don't know what Trump means when he says things like in Iraq we should have taken the oil, or in Syria, because it seems to me that the US benefits just from oil being pumped and on the market, um, in like a friendly country, and I don't understand why other raw materials would work differently. And
I
like
mean, is it just
they're
saying
not going to
like
just fly them here and put them in a bunker.
U.S. firms have right of first refusal on the extraction?
Yeah, maybe.
But these are multinationals anyway. That they're like, what's an American firm anyway? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is another spectacle thing, like Trump just thinks it's good politics to say, in return for winning this war, we got access to natural resources that we didn't have before, when really that only benefits like the firms and they just hit the open market anyway. Or if there's some aspect of like state control of resources that actually is valuable and that I don't fully understand. I would believe either, but I don't know enough.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna move on to, maybe this will be our last thing. This has been a good conversation for me. I'm just like using you as a resource to learn things that I've been too lazy to actually understand. But so okay, I'm gonna categorize this as sort of a debacle with this release yesterday of the alleged Epstein list. Like, what's going on? Like, why are they wasting cycles on this? Like, why are they, like, release it or don't, like, stop teasing it, basically.
Yeah, I'm like more reticent to talk about this. I think just because this is
Because you're on the list.
yeah, exactly, because I spent a lot of
Yeah.
time in Little St. James.
Yeah.
But it's I feel very negatively about what happened yesterday. But a general rule I try to operate on, and should be a caveat that applies to everything we've discussed here, is in general, Trump's political instincts and understanding of how things will play out are better than mine. So sometimes when something looks bad, I just think I just have to wait, because like
Yeah.
if I think it was a very clear misstep, I've thought that before and been wrong, so maybe I should pause. That being said, my understanding of what's going on from some people who are close to it, who like um haven't don't have like a partisan, people I trust have said basically like there are no Epstein files. Like basically a lot of the names of people who are on the plane we already have. There's like thousands of documents that were seized from his house that are not public, but we don't actually know if that includes revelations about his funding or close associates that would be different. So this is another weird thing where it's like the internet has covered this as if the government was in possession of like an explicit list of names that would be like, these are people who committed sex crimes, names, but that
Yeah.
such a list does not exist. We are already in possession of a lot of the names of people who went to the island, and like the contents of the remaining documents are unknown. And if that's all true, that sort of makes me very curious about what they're doing, because I do worry sometimes that maybe with this love of spectacle, they aren't always 100%. Like, I wonder if there was a conversation, like maybe it was a little sloppy. They were looking through some stuff they got from the FBI, and they were like, there's nothing new in this. There's no red meat for the base. And then Pam Bondi or someone was like, well, let's just say we don't have new revelations because the FBI and the Southern District of New York are illegally withholding documents. I mean, maybe even to some extent that's true. And then the story will become, we're fighting the deep state still, and people will forget about the Epstein thing. But like, that seems sort of unwise to me, because uh, you really acted like you had something. And so I don't think it's that easy to turn people's attention, because that reveals like, oh, so you were announcing that you were going to release new information when you weren't even in possession of that information and didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
So like, you were expecting the FBI to get it to you at noon, and then you'd have a press conference at 5. Like, that seems weird. So I can't figure out what's going on. It seems like a blunder, but I'll hold my tongue and see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, that's about. I mean, I'm just perplexed by the whole thing. Like, uh, you know, should have said a few weeks ago. Like they're the people who have this stuff, if it exists, are not being forthcoming, and we're gonna get to the root of that. And I don't know, maybe that.
But yeah, I'll say in general, this is now a bipartisan thing, that the flavor is slightly different, but I really do not appreciate the way our entire government is now playing footsie with disclosure. And like, I don't know what's going on, but it's extremely irksome to me. Like, the sort of timeline I would present is like, all the UAP stuff is super weird. I think Congress bringing in whistleblowers to say that like we're in touch with like entities that are us from the future and not even aliens, like that should never have happened. I don't like Kash Patel going on podcasts and being like, look, like I've seen the JFK stuff. Uh it's crazy, and it implicates things you guys would never think about, and that's why we have to be careful when we release. Like, this actually is an area where I think the taboo of decorum is important. Like, I think if you have an important revelation that is in the public interest to know, you should make it immediately and release evidence. And if you can't really tell us anything, you should not mention these things at all. But
Oh yeah, there's nothing more annoying. Like in a personal context, that's extremely annoying. When someone tells you, "Oh, I have something big, I just can't tell you." Okay, well then don't tell me you have something big. And then in a public context, it's like a very fast way to lose credibility. It's just like,
yes, and
okay,
it
like
actually leads me to believe in both cases, like both with the Biden administration and with some of these Trump people, it leads me to believe that like the government is not a real thing and no one knows what's going on. Because like, if you have an organization that's in possession of very important information, like unless you have like criminals in your ranks, it's really easy in a closed group to be like, here's why this information is valuable to us and why it can't get out. And then like everyone's on the same page. When you have lots and lots of actors in Congress or at agencies just sort of flying solo and being like, yeah, I don't know, I've seen some crazy stuff, maybe I'll be allowed to talk about it. Like, it makes it look like everything is out of control, that no one's in charge, that like no different parts of the government view themselves as on the same team or working towards a collective goal. And that, like, right wing people have been saying for a long time that that's reality. But part of your job is to hide that reality. Or if you're going to do disclosure, like do actual disclosure. Don't don't give us evidence that the government is chaotic and incompetent, but then also still hide the ultimate truth. Like you sort of gotta pick a lane, and it seems like telling us that there are deep dark secrets, confirming that, but then not telling us what they are is like the most destabilizing and least productive path. And it seems like both the Biden administration and Trump too are like on that path. And so
Yeah.
I kind of don't expect anything revelatory on any of these fronts to come out. And
Yeah.
that would be
Um,
fine if they'd shut the fuck up about it.
yeah. Yeah. I agree. Last thing I think I'll touch on. What are you what are you watching? Anything good lately?
So, it may seem from our conversations and all my extended monologues that I'm following the news very closely, but actually, in my extended unemployment, I've gotten so bored of applying for jobs that now I make myself do like 3 a day, but then I'm just watching so much slop content. And one of the things that I really enjoyed, it like pulled me out of my depression and actually was like riveting, is over the past several months I rewatched Lost from start to
Mm.
finish. The first time I've watched it since its original run, and it's just sort of incredible, like how good TV used to be. I mean, I think
I
it.
never watched Lost. I never saw it. Like I know how it ends because it became a cultural thing. So I did see like that last like 10 minutes or whatever, but I never watched the show. Should I watch
It's.
it?
I think so. It's just like the quality of the writing, acting, and I think it was the most expensive show ever. I know it was the most expensive pilot ever, but it looks great. It's super well done. Um, it's like an 130-hour movie, and
Yeah.
it like, which obviously is a lot. um, but I don't know. It's so great. I like. It's sort of it. It really inspired me, and like I was very happy while watching it. But there is a depressing aspect of it where I think you watch it and you're like, oh, we are not at all like at the high point of our culture, and we're
So you
never
mean
going.
Severance does not compare?
I don't think so.
I
Um,
haven't seen season 2. I don't know. I liked season 1 kind of, but then, they had like the stuff with Christopher Walken being gay. Like, look, I mean, I watched all the modern slop. I mean, I can handle the guy being gay, but it just felt like so stupid. Like no, like don't make this guy gay. Like just don't do that, please. And like that sort of like killed it for me. And it's like it's not. Other shows have gay characters. Other good shows can have gay characters, but that just like I don't know. It just felt like an assault on the viewer, and I was like into it, and I kind of just lost that killed the momentum for me, and I don't know if I'd bother with season 2, but everyone's talking about it. Like it's the show of the last like it's not even gotten that much hype, but it's gotten the most hype of anything I've seen in the last like year or 2 years probably. So
Certain types of shows love the idea that like a character just could be gay. Um,
yeah,
that there's nothing about their behavior or personality that would tip you off to that. It just comes out, and like it's not as if I have met gay people where I was surprised when I found out, but it
yeah.
seems like
Like when I was
Hollywood,
hanging out with Peter Thiel, I was surprised.
but it seems like Hollywood goes a little bit further with being like, it sometimes seems like almost like they conceived of characters and then later were like, make these two gay. And it's
It's
like,
like, yeah, this exceedingly conventionally masculine guy, and not even masculine in a cartoonish way, just like in an actual like the way most like older men are just sort of like um just kind of a normal guy. It's like wouldn't it be crazy if this normal guy was gay?
yeah. So, but yeah, I agree with you there. I think with Lost, it's just like, it's a very sincere show, and it deals with sort of themes of like fate and free will and God in a very unself-conscious way. And like it's sort of surprising, like if someone, because people say things, like after 9/11 the US lost its faith and became cynical, but Lost almost seems from a more innocent and belief laden time. People were talking in the Wormhead chat about like DFW and new sincerity. Like Lost is almost a part of new sincerity. Like the characters are just like trying to be good people and very plagued by whether or not they are, and they take morality and ethics very seriously. So it just seems like both technically and creatively and ethically, it comes from like a much more serious and competent time in American culture. So
Yeah.
it's fun to watch for that reason, and it's also a little bit sad to watch for that
I like
reason.
how you casually drop Wormhead chat. Like
Oh,
people
Wormwood, yeah.
well Wormhead is funnier, and it's like yeah, we congregate in a place called Wormhead. Don't ask any more questions about what goes on there. Um okay, Law, I'll check it out. I know my wife watched it like when it was new, like, and so like, and she always spoke highly of it. So maybe, I mean, we don't have that much time for shows these days, but I would go back to I'll ask her about going back to that and watching it. Um this the thing I've been watching with her, and we've made a habit of watching it every year when it comes out. Sometimes they do two a year. Even though they like stopped being good after like the second season, but it's a reality show called Love Is Blind. Have you seen this?
I have not seen it, but I've heard about it.
You know the premise. They
Yeah.
they 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 put you in these rooms. They call them pods, and you talk to each other, a man and a woman. Thankfully, in like the 8 or 9 seasons they've done, they actually haven't done a gay season, but they a man and a woman talk to each other, and they like see if they can fall in love. And so it's kind of all about like how charismatic and charming can you be without seeing each other. And the show's a little bit stupid, first of all, because they only really select people who are at least like sixes and above. Um, so it's kind of like, well, there's a you're gambling that the person on the other side is actually going to be pretty attractive in most cases. So that's kind of dumb.
That
But
seems like
other
a huge oversight. Like surely if we had our real Jewish Bengalis producing this show, they would know that the biggest potential for entertainment is you get some high rizzed, very disgusting man to trick
yeah,
all these
yeah,
women.
exactly. That would be a good wild card. They need to do that. Maybe they will, because I think a lot of the fans have been saying like the show is not that good now. But I don't encourage anyone to watch it. I mean, it is capital S slop, but people will spend all day doing gender discourse online, and if they like gender discourse, this is a good. This is like a total fertile ground for that stuff. Like it's just like all these instances of revealed preference and like guys running game and stuff like that, and it's very funny. Um, or like just like kind of female convoluted argumentation approaches and stuff like that. So I don't know if anyone watches it. Um, you know, let me know. We can talk about it. There's a lot to talk about,
Can
but
start blind chat.
yeah, you have to have seen it. But yeah, they should do one with like some ugly guys. They do it in different cities around the country. This most recent one was like Minnesota, or Minneapolis, and like one of the girls is like, where do you stand on like politics, to the guy, and he's like, I don't know, I don't really think about that stuff. And it's funny because I could immediately tell like he was hiding his answer. um like he probably leans conservative, but his approach was just to say like, I don't really think about that stuff. I'm not tuned into all that. She's like, well, it's really important to me, and it's like been really important since George Floyd and all that. That's it. And so it's doubly funny because obviously it's not that important to her. She'd actually never thought about it until 3 or 4 years earlier. So, I guess it's like 5 years now, isn't it? 2020. Oh,
Yeah.
anyway, um, anyway, that's kind of a thing I watch every year. It's funny. If more people watched it, there would be a lot to talk about, but they don't. So, Anyway, you mentioned this one other thing. This could be the last thing. You mentioned this Grand Theft Hamlet. What is that? I'd heard about it, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah, so it was during lockdown. Um, these two actors, I don't know if they were didn't have a job at the time or because of COVID they didn't have a job, but one of the guys is married to a documentarian, and there's two actor friends, so it's like two guys and a girl. And during lockdown, they're playing a lot of Grand Theft Auto together, and then they try like, Grand Theft Auto Online, and they try to see if they can get other people they meet in the game to do auditions and then perform Hamlet with them inside the game. Uh, and so they're just like walking up to people, on the streets of uh, Las Vegas or wherever that GTA Online is set, and being like, "Hey, do you like Shakespeare? Do you want to come read a monologue and audition?" And it's sort of about like their travails trying to get normal gamers to do this.
Is it pretty good? I'd say, like, seen comments that's like, oh, it's surprisingly like touching or something like that. But I don't know if I can
I
trust.
think there will be a some people will get filtered just by having to watch a GTA stream for 90 minutes. But like I sometimes watch gaming streams, and I also think I listen to things more than I watch them, and I'm like most attentive to dialogue, because to me it felt like listening to an old This American Life when they were slightly when they'd really do slice of life stuff, and it was less, it might be like cosmopolitan and gay coded, but it wouldn't be explicitly uh democratic or whatever, and they'd sort of be like interesting people you'd come into contact with. And it's a lot like that. Like I think I was watching, but I was doing something, and it's just sort of listening to these two nerds like try to convince gamers to help put on their play, and it's sort of charming in a weird way.
I tried to watch it, but I thought it'd be like on YouTube, and it was on Mubi. Is that where you watched it?
I watched it at I don't know if we're allowed to confess to crimes on here, but I watched it at
Oh,
www.123movies3.net.
oh yeah. I mean, not allowed or unallowed. Uh,
But
but
I'm in
okay. I didn't.
international waters on my boat, of course.
Yeah. Uh, okay. Yeah. So it was on. I tried to watch it. It was on Mubi, and I'm like, I don't know what Mubi is. But it's. I know it's not Tubi, which I like, or anyway, Mubi. So I wasn't gonna watch it, but maybe I'll check it out. Uh,
This
okay. I
doesn't
think.
even
Oh
need to
yeah.
go in the podcast, but the last thing I'd say about Lost is just that the first season is really excellent, and you'll know whether or not you're hooked from the pilot. So I think you and your wife should try the pilot sometime.
Yeah, I'm sure I'd like it. I'm sure I would. I would probably, and it would be fun. What year was that? Like, it was right after 9/11. You said, right?
I think it was 2004 that it started.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure I would. I'm sure I just almost always enjoy like going back to that time period. It almost doesn't matter what it is. So okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. We went a little long. Hopefully, people enjoyed this. Hopefully, they needed something to keep them company as they're driving as they're leaving their government job in DC and driving to uh, I don't know, driving to their new job in the South as a Bucky's general manager.
Yeah, with a massive pay raise.
Yeah, making twice as much. Okay, thank you guys, and well, thank you, and thanks those who listened, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks, Grant.